So I say this off the record, okay, not to be recorded. Don't shoot me. Thanks for coming, everyone. This is a special lecture today, which we advertised through the Southeast European Studies Center, through Koordinierungsstelle. I'm very glad that Mrs. Adler-Klausner is here today with us. Hopefully you have become part of this community where information is shared. We are very honored, especially during this summer term, to have Marina Hughson here with us as visiting professor. In fact, the Eigner Rollet visiting professorship went to her. She's an extremely well-known, renowned, we've just spoken about it, scholar, activist, consultant, everything related with a perspective of more than 3 decades, sort of being part of the women's movement from the very beginning and seeing it taking shape in a variety of countries, both from an academic point of view, also from the point of view of advising institutions like the European Community or national donors who are eager to implement projects in the field. So while we were preparing this, we were just speaking again that it's a huge field, it's extremely dynamic and very, very difficult, let's say in the year 2014, to actually see where we stand and what works and what doesn't work and what is a sound recommendation and what isn't. So it really takes a unique understanding of the processes in the various countries, and I think Marina is also renowned for coining the term semi-periphery, which is an area that we at the Russian East European and Eurasian Studies Center deal with a lot without using the term semi-periphery. Hello, I mean, all the countries that are somehow European but somehow, let's say, on the doorstep, or maybe I think that's my understanding of the term, but you will correct it, who themselves feel that they're deeply European, like Georgians, but who are actually delegated or relegated to some second-class neighbor instead of having a viable membership perspective. So we kind of have a second-class Europeans created through the fact that the EU is probably too indifferent or too weary of experiments and too much concerned about its own welfare than to recognize the transformations that are taking place and that there are actually people all over the outside borders of the EU. It's different in the Mediterranean, where we have the refugees, where we actually have hundreds and hundreds of people dying, drowning. We can't have that on the land borders, but we have people very, very sort of eagerly anticipating belonging to Europe. So it's kind of a difficult kind of also emotional state where you stand and what kind of policies you bring to such countries. For me, this is also part, of course, of our class, gender and the law, and I'm very happy to see the students who will be working with us the next couple of days. Actually, if you are interested to join us, I feel very free. We're only starting. We will start tomorrow from 6 p.m., from 6 to 9 p.m. And we have 2 more block days on the 15th and 16th of May. And we will actually start here. We will focus on the field of women in peace and security, which is by now a recognized, let's say, policy area. We will look, my colleague Ani, who is here from Armenia, will discuss the amount to which sexual and gender-based violence has become part of the recognized case law in terms of humanitarian law and also in terms of international criminal law, drawing on the experience of the Balkan countries, where I think rape was also used as a weapon or as a means of intimidating civilian populations. So here we have one piece of Balkan experiences. We will later have an NGO practitioner come to us next week, Maya Pargamadze from Georgia, who will be looking at internally IDPs, internally displaced persons, as a result of the Georgian-Abkhazian conflict. And the idea is really to kind of focus on one frontier. Georgia, which would be Semiperiphery in your usage, has gone through conflicts with Russia, also with the Abkhaz people living on the territory of Georgia, also with Ossetians that which created an enormous amount of suffering, created breakaway territories, frozen conflicts, international crises, scenarios. And Georgia is one hopeful new European country that is now about to implement the Istanbul Convention of the Council of Europe, that is actually having a very active civil society. And my own curiosity was really, and we cannot do it otherwise, but to see what is Marina's experience from many years of observing civil society in gender issues in the women's movement. How would that connect to, let's say, maybe naive or maybe fresh or newcomers in countries such as Georgia, where a new generation of young people is actually taking up these issues and doing civil society work? And we've had one conversation, and it seemed like Marina was saying, those people are doomed to fail. They're doomed to be.
They need to redefine their roles, the civil society organizations.
From the Balkans, from many years of women's movement there, you cannot just bring gender issues to Georgia and everyone will say hooray. Even though a lot of money is being poured into this, it's a Western agenda, and lots of Western donors go into this. It's one of the processes we don't feel indifferent about, but we'd like to understand them better. And so we're starting today with this class. We're recording it in order to put it on YouTube by tomorrow, so that those from among the class and also outsiders who have no chance to be here today can watch it if they want. And we'll continue tomorrow at 6 p.m. If you want, please join us. You're very welcome. Okay, and that's enough as an introduction. I think I should thank you also on behalf of Florian Bieber from the Center of Southeast European Studies, because this is really bridging our two agendas. I hope it will be a very interesting and stimulating talk. Thank you. So I'll move on.
Thank you, Thomas, for this introduction that provoked me several ways. I just wanted to jump from the chair and start talking. Thank you for coming. I really feel honored, and I'm happy to be here and to be able to talk about these things, because I work on them constantly. And unfortunately, I have many questions as a scholar, but being an expert and the international expert, I have to find answers all the time, because I'm asked for answers. And right now, because I'm supposed, actually, I'm over that line a bit on this report on Bosnia, which is, I'm doing gender country, it's called Gender Country Profile for Bosnia and Herzegovina for European Commission, which among other things has a specific assignment related to gender mainstreaming of IPA projects. And there are many other issues that I am really dealing these days with, and I'm overloaded with information. So I couldn't wait actually to start talking, to get rid of some of that, and even to help me myself structure some of the things while I was imagining what I should be doing for you. My perspective will be more, I am a sociologist, that is my basic background, and I think sociologically, which means I think through structures and long time or more time-consuming social changes. And when I think about gender equality, I also think from that perspective. Nowadays, that's called theory of change, which means that I'm concerned in what way, most efficiently, we can change social structures in a desirable, for a desirable goals. It's a very complicated story, and I am approaching it from very different perspectives, which I will be talking now. So I'm starting now, officially. First, I will self-position myself a little bit more. Then I will be talking about EU accession and gender equality, which can be summarized under the formula, which I really like, more compliance than commitment. Then I will be talking about how we can conceptualize policy intervention in a domain of gender equality. What I have learned from a certain assignment that I have had for SIDA, Swedish SIDA, lessons learned, and I will go to conclusions first from that part, and then I will give a very brief overview of Bosnia as a case study, and maybe that will provoke also further discussion. I have a academic career, and basically I think about knowledge as an activist project, meaning that creation of knowledge really is important for the change of the world. But I was also a real activist from the beginning of the 90s, and I edited a book on women's movement in Serbia, which is unfortunately in Serbian, but it's I'm very proud of the book because it collected testimonies of women leaders of the movement and basic documents that women's groups produced from the early 90s. We had authentic movement in Serbia and in Croatia before the donors, and I think this is a very important fact and very important for one of the lessons why some things cannot easily be transplanted into other countries. So we did have women's movement before the wars and before the donors. Then I would like to say that I worked for key international agents, stakeholders in the domain of gender equality, very much for UN Women, doing different research and policy recommendations for a European Parliament, which, based on my study on the Balkans, actually issued a resolution for the improvement of the position of women in the Balkans. That study was 270 pages, and it included 10 countries of the Balkans, including Turkey. Then I worked for, and I work now for European Commission, IFAD, International Fund for Agricultural Development. I worked on rural poverty in Azerbaijan, so I was present in the region. And I also worked in Armenia for establishment, for UNDP in Armenia, for establishing of gender machinery in Armenia, which I designed the whole project, and a year ago, I was told that it was again discussed with Prime Minister there based on these recommendations. So I am working from different perspectives. As an author, I also published a book which I would be happy to share with you if you're interested, because I have it in PDF format. You will see my mail at the end of this, this lecture. The book is called Knowledge Production at the Semi-Periphery, a Gender Perspective. And the first chapter has the name Non-White Whites, Non-European Europeans, and Gendered Non-Citizens. These three dimensions actually explain what is so different in the semi-periphery and why it is so difficult to transplant or transfer some of the solutions from the core countries into the semi-periphery. I developed the concept of semi-periphery exactly because working for European Commission for some other projects, never mind, women scientists, etc., in Eastern Europe, etc., from the beginning of 2000 especially, it became very clear to me that there is a huge disconnection between implementation and what are the objectives of this implementation, that there is a huge misunderstanding of the context, etc. And this really pushed me into defining the problems from the epistemological point of view, where I argue really for contextual and contextualized knowledges, and I have developed a whole typology of knowledges, which I cannot go now into. So what I'm trying to say is that I really, over and over again, come to the conclusion that knowledge is the key, but of course we can have different perspectives in making that knowledge, and I believe in what I call cross-fertilization of different fields and holistic understanding that can come out of it. I had many dilemmas being an activist and seeing how things don't work and how much effort we put in peace movements and still we couldn't stop the wars, etc., etc. We went through a lot of dramas and we still do in that region and other regions, unfortunately. And it was always an open question for me whether I'm naive, what should be done, etc. And the older I get, based on the experience, it is becoming easier for me to define my position, which I define as non-naive idealist and proactive hyper-realist. And actually, this is something I would really like to share with you, that I actually refuse to see any collision between idealism and realism. And I believe in possibility of intelligent and comprehensive intervention into the social reality. I think about effective public policies as those which can find the right balance between what is desirable and what is possible, so that they can be effective and efficient with limited counter effects. Because what I have been seeing over the years are really very often counter effects that eat up, in a way, what was the main intention. And I think that if we approach the problems in this holistic perspective, combining different types of knowledges, then we really can empower ourselves for intelligent interventions into the social reality. I studied sociology because I believe in social reform. And now more than ever, I think these issues are very important and we shouldn't be giving up because someone might tell us that it's too complicated, that nothing can be done. No, a lot can be done, but it has to be approached in the proper way. I don't claim I have the answers. In fact, I always have more questions than answers. But as I said previously, being an international expert, I am very often in the role where I'm asked for answers, so I have to try to deliver them the best I can. Strategic thinking about gender equality policies requires cross-sectoral approach, which includes theory, research, as well as experiential knowledge. And I think that, in a way, activism, if it is reflected activism, then it is a kind of experiential knowledge. So not everything is knowledge. We have to reflect on it, on our experience, to become knowledge. Academic knowledge can be very practical, and the other way around, experiential knowledge can really have seeds of theory. So these divisions are all artificial, and it's better that academia understands these things. Otherwise, academia will become completely out of fashion. The background is what is EU. Now I'm going to switch to EU and accession. Within the EU, the principle of gender equality is being integrated into all community policies and activities through the framework of gender mainstreaming. Over the time, EU also strengthened the requirements related to the accession process, in the first decade of the 21st century, it was obvious that there is a kind of close correlation between gender equality and EU accession. When I wrote that study in 2003 that I mentioned for the European Parliament, it became quite clear to me that accession process is very beneficial for promotion of gender equality. So at that time, I wrote that harmonization is absolutely beneficial for gender mainstreaming in the Balkan countries. The position of the country in relation to EU correlates with the quality and scope of specific programs, action plans, and institutional mechanisms. And of course, legal regulation. But I'm not a lawyer, and I don't think from this legal perspective. However, at this point, it would be, this was written in 2003, it would be important to compare the real effects of gender mainstreaming in the West with the expectations in the Balkans related to the establishment of gender machineries. This was a mild criticism of Europe, because as we have concluded in the conference we had here in Graz in November last year, there is this paradoxical situation with Europe, which is still going on, that Europe is prescribing to accession countries this and that, while at the same time it does not prescribe to itself. And there is huge diversity among European countries in a sense of how much of gender equality there exists. So this is an ironic part of the story. However, there is something which is very important, and please try to remember this, because this is a major message of my lecture today, that we need to observe things as a process and a change of structures, of course. But as a process, as learning process, social learning process. If we compare European documents from, I don't know, 15 years ago and nowadays, we can see the changes. We can see the changes of emphasis, of strategies, of thinking how things could be done, etc. The field of gender equality is enormously open, and in a way it is a very exciting field, because from an epistemic point of view and from a science point of view, because things develop very fast and things change fast in one way. On the other way, we see that patriarchal structures are quite stable, but in some domains. So Europe at the moment is in a position when it really argues for gender mainstreaming of all sectoral programs, which are and will be financed by pre-accession financial instruments such as IPA 2 now in Bosnia. This is IPA, and MP is for countries that are so-called neighboring countries. This is interesting because gender mainstreaming in Europe is really not developed adequately, believe it or not. I have been now in a position for maybe a month that I am really struggling with the task that I have been given, how to define what European delegation in Bosnia should do, how they should gender mainstream IPA projects that are, it's a lot of money pouring into the country, and it is extremely important that they are gender mainstreamed, because then women and gender equality in general really are getting something out of it. You know, if you have a huge amount of money for transport, for area of transport or agricultural development, and if women are not included, that's a pure loss. So things are really urgent and things need to be defined. While I was searching on from European sources, it really, like what I will be saying now, I'm 95% sure, I'm not 100% sure, maybe I'm missing something, but all my research resulted in the following conclusion, that Europe doesn't have actually gender mainstreaming sectoral strategy for different sectors. And one of the proofs that I'm right was that I recently, I think last week, I actually discovered that European Gender Equality Institute is now making a kind of call for interested parties to apply for the project of how to do gender mainstreaming in sectors in Europe. So you understand that the Institute wouldn't apply for, wouldn't raise this issue if this exists. However, as as an expert put in a position to resolve this, I was doing internet research, I was consulting my colleagues, just to understand that we have a following paradox. Because UN was working much more, and UN Women, on gender mainstreaming, countries, developing countries in Asia, in Africa, have developed much better tools for gender mainstreaming of sectors than Europe. Now Europe is actually in a position to start learning from these developing countries and the projects that have been made there. This is an interesting situation. I think a very similar situation can be made, or a comparison with semi-periphery. I deeply believe that the core countries or the center can learn much from the semi-periphery. And in Bosnia, for example, I'm talking about this conflict, etc. People in Bosnia are very much convinced that there is much to be learned from Balkan experiences and from Bosnian experiences in gender equality, because Bosnia is transition country and post-conflict country, and in fact Bosnia is also developing different innovative approaches to gender mainstream. What I'm trying to tell you is that there is this confusing situation where those who give money or donors are actually in a position to learn, and sometimes they recognize it, sometimes they don't. Like Kvinna till Kvinna, which is Swedish organization and which was very much present in the Balkans from the beginning of the war, has learned a lot from our autonomous movements. And Kvinna tried, however, when you read Kvinna's documents, much of that would look like the ownership of Kvinna, not our local ownership. Not as that we have invented different methods and ways of coping with wars. And Kvinna tried to transplant some of the methods into the Caucasus, and it didn't work. It didn't work for the simple reason that there were no women's movements like they existed in Serbia, Croatia, and later in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So it's an interesting issue, who is learning from whom, and how is that recognized. But if we ignore that and just think about common good, maybe that's not so important anyhow. One author from Sweden defined gains related to gender equality based on European support as threefold. Introduction of new gender legislation, that can be taken as European, as a consequence of European influence. Introduction of institutional mechanisms for advancement of gender equality, and women's movement strengthening and gaining legitimacy. So it's not women's movement's foundations, because that has to be coming from the grassroots. It has to be authentic. You cannot implant women's movement. Of course, you can support individual NGOs, and this is what we have at the moment. We have what we call NGOization of women's movement in the Balkans, which is a consequence of projectization, which means donors are giving projects to women's organizations, and this is what is actually killing women's movements. There is a term I recently heard from a Bosnian woman who is at the head of one women's organization called projectitis, like a disease of projects, meaning that women's organizations are pushed to make projects, they're donor-driven more and more, so they're following donors' agendas. It's not, they don't define projects based on their own understanding of what are the needs of the communities or the states they live in. So, what we are having largely as a consequence of this type of interventions is now more and more described as the problem of implementation of the laws related to gender equality. I like to say that there isn't a problem of implementation, but there is a problem of contextualization. Because it's not understood that just bringing the laws and legal regulation cannot change societies. Societies function differently. And please pay attention to the following. If you know anything about women's movements in the West, then you know that, for example, let's take American women's movement, the third way, the one from the 60s, when these ideas of legal regulation originate from. There were first these women who, for different reasons, wanted to get together to define what kinds of problems they had. So it was conscience-raising movement. And they had conscience-raising groups. Groups through which they were raising consciousness about what is the problem with gender equality. What is the problem? Gender-based violence was not recognized as a problem at all until women defined it. The process of defining what is the problem is a long process of some kind of collective knowledge making. It's not that one person can define whatever, because this type of definition, the discourses, are about communication. So you have to have large-scale communication to have inception of different concepts. In a feminist theory, in feminist methodology, we like to say that knowledge in feminism has been articulated exactly from the places where there was silence. So what is silenced is taken then from feminists to be analyzed. And this is how many things have been discovered in contemporary social science, including, for example, intersectionalities that are now being very popular. So you have to have communication, large-scale communication. Then there was a movement asking for legal regulation. And then laws are made, and then there comes the next phase where you have to understand how the laws will be implemented and how the punishments for those who do not implement the laws will be made and who is authorized to do that. And then also comes a whole set, or parallelly to that, a whole set of experts, people who know now these new things. And then also policies are designed. So you see, there is this whole movement which lasts for several decades. If you try to just take legal provisions or just some policy recommendation without understanding the process, then you are nowhere. You cannot promote social change. You can do it only if you are doing it in a very wise and very well-founded way, in a sense that you understand social context fully, that you have research, and that you communicate with the context in a proper way. So at this moment, with Eastern Europe and with the Southeastern Europe, we are at the place where there is overall agreement that there is a profound gap between stated goals and their actual implementation, stated goals of gender equality policies or legal regulation, which has also an implicit goal of changing gender relations. So more compliance than commitment is something which was defined by a Croatian activist, and I think this is really a perfect definition, which means that these countries simply adopt the laws, not only the laws on gender equality, many other provisions, etc., because you know that Europe is functioning like this big machinery, bureaucratic machinery that produces these laws, regulations, etc. And these countries and parliaments, and you can see it in our small countries, it's very much visible, they sit night and day and they just adopt the laws, and who knows how many of them read them. So they adopt the laws, fine, but when it comes to implementation, then we face all the problems. There is a profound over-regulation of everything, and one of the things that I really like to emphasize when I lecture on this semi-periphery, which I do here, actually I lecture a course under the title Gender Regimes at Semi-Periphery. And when I lecture, I simply like to use metaphors. So the following metaphor would be like if you have a pot and you have certain types of vegetables, etc., and you want to produce a certain type of meal, it really depends on what is already in the pot. And this is what the contexts are about. So if you have completely different ideas what is in the pot, then you cannot really produce the meal you want to produce. This is that simple. And also the problem is with overregulation. If you have small societies that are largely underdeveloped, or not developed enough, I will not say underdeveloped because that would not be the true definition. They are like medium level developed. All societies in Europe are more or less on that scale, but still they're poor societies. Overregulation, bureaucracy, etc., is a huge burden to them. So it's not only that you can regulate everything, in fact, you are in a way impoverishing those societies even more. And then there is an advocacy by some of the authors, and which I really think cuts into the essence, that we should move from equality to rights to equality of results. This is a very simple definition of what should be done. What is the problem? The problem is more compliance than commitment. So we should move from these legal regulations to really understanding what is going on the ground, to equality of results. The story about how Europe is influencing these Eastern European countries is ongoing now for years, from 2000 mainly. And those countries that have been accepted, that have become European members, they do not necessarily have higher standards of gender equality or higher realization of those gender equality goals. I want to say that becoming a member of European Union is no guarantee that your gender equality in the country will be more pronounced. I had the pleasure of speaking at European Parliament. I was one of 3 speakers, I think, at the occasion when these 10 countries were joining Europe, and there was this session of European Parliament under the title "What is Europe doing? What is Europe giving to women?" or something like that. It can be found on internet. And I was emphasizing the the status of inequalities at the moment when these countries were joining Europe. And when I did the Balkan study as well, there was no difference. I mean, being a European member does not really bring any big changes in gender equality in society. This is a problem. It can bring changes in legal regulation, but it doesn't bring big changes in society. And this is even more so because of this neoliberal development model, which leaves many women and men without jobs and puts the burden for care work on women more than ever, more than previous times. So the collapse of different institutions that is happening due to the neoliberal agenda is actually affecting women much more than the process of European accession. Now, it was interesting that there was a gathering of UNIFEM at that time, now it's UN Women, Regional Office for Central and Eastern Europe, and some European bodies, and they realized that there are many common problems with countries that just joined Europe or the countries that are in accession or the countries that are even further, the common problems. And then they defined priorities like investment into advancement of reinforcement of legislation, addressing watering down of gender EU terminology. This is really interesting because what we will be finding more and more, first of all, feminism, which generated these issues in contemporary societies, and which is one of the most fertile theoretical fields. And if you look at any major publisher, you can see that publishing in domain of gender studies, women's studies is just booming, and it's producing essential work. Well, feminism has been completely deleted in a way from UN and EU documents, and the gender equality is now being presented as something that, well, of course it has right of its own, but we are losing a lot if we don't know the history of fights, of women's fights for their rights. If we don't know that, and if we don't take that into account, we are really much more vulnerable to lose the rights. And it is happening all the time. You know that the pressure for abortion rights is very active in Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe. And actually we are all the time threatened to lose different rights, while at the same time we are not given knowledge about women's movements and fight for the rights. So this is a big distortion that is going on in different institutions of different societies. So watering down of gender EU terminology means, in a way, to neutralize terminology related to women's issues, women's rights, etc., or even to go into other direction, like legalizing prostitution, which is it is contested issue even among feminists. But you know that there is not one feminism; there are different feminisms, yeah, plural. Anyhow, this I think that this issue on prostitution is one of the best examples how the things can be turned upside down. And in a way, we live in a very cynical society, so legalizing something, everything can be legalized after, I can imagine everything being legalized. Pedophilia can be legalized at a certain point, etc., etc. These women's groups also were asking for affirming of the role of civil society. They were also asking, that more attention should be paid to multiple discrimination against women. Now I would like to go to something more concrete and more creative. I had a challenge to do the review of CEDA's support programs in Eastern Europe and Western Balkans during 10 years, 12 countries. And that was huge work, which gave me, including Georgia, which gave me quite important insights, at least to my understanding. I was also asked to deal with the issue of success of the projects. What makes a project or program, once it is financed by a donor, what makes it successful? And while doing that, it was a huge database, although database of CEDA, surprisingly enough, although CEDA is one of the main donors in these countries for gender equality, and it is profiling itself in international diplomacy to be the key stakeholder in national terms for gender equality. So this is the position that Sweden itself is taking for itself. To my surprise, the database on these projects and programs was not really perfect at all, but nevertheless, it provided me with certain insights. I started with defining what I call gender policy field. So what is gender policy field? It is a field made of gender targeting programs and gender mainstreamed programs, because there are these two typical actions, as they call it in Europe, or two typical type of activities. One, when it's targeting women, one is a kind of positive action where women are targeted to be able to reach equality if when they're in the fields where they're discriminated. And gender mainstreaming programs is something different, where gender mainstreaming as a tool, as a method, is being applied through the projects. Now, this is what gender policy field is about. What I want to claim is that it has its own logic of development, which we need to understand. As I already said, this field of gender, of women's equality, gender equality, is enormously diverse field. And it seems almost confusing because it has many stakeholders, institutional, non-institutional, national, and international. I actually have another graph with these stakeholders, which is really very confusing for anyone trying to understand. But if we define this field, then we can see how it changes. And I have discovered this gradual increasing of the field of gender policy field, extension, and moving into the new areas, which I think is really very important, that the field is growing and moving into the new areas, which is a big challenge for policy, because you don't stay with one area, like violence against women, but it is growing and encompassing the whole society. So it has its own immanent logic of change, and based on the movements and the projects in the Balkans, I have showed how it moved from the core to this big circle. These are circles that belong to the big circle. I moved it this way because I couldn't do it better. But I want to read to you how this actually has grown. From women victims in the war, that was the first NGO organizations organized, women organized. They didn't call themselves women's NGOs, they called themselves women's groups. In Bosnia, in Serbia, in Croatia. They were non-institutional. They were starting to get organized for the protection of women, victims of violence, women refugees, and they started to organize for as anti-war movement. That's how it started. Then it moved to minority issues because the wars immediately raised the problem of ethnic national minorities. To health issues and reproductive issues because of the rape. This is really interesting. These two things were interrelated, like Medica, one of the first organizations in Bosnia, founded by one Italian gynecologist. Actually, they started to treat women who were victims of rape, and then they spread into health and reproductive issues. Then women in politics, because then there was this idea that if women take over politics and if women start to decide, there will be no war. So it was very much anti-war connected idea. Public awareness for women to be elected in these so-called free democratic, so-called democratic elections, and networking among women's organizations. That was then the time, which, for example, in the Balkans would be the end of 90s. Then comes gender legislation, gender mechanisms, and law enforcement, when the dialogue with Europe actually starts. Then development, issues of development, rural women, and then reaching out from metropolitan areas or big city areas to rural areas and engage and setting up women's groups in areas outside of big cities. Because in the beginning, it's always the big cities that have women's NGOs. Then the issue of local development increases as is raised up, because you go closer to the field. And finally, this final circle is empowering men to support women, because then by that time it became clear that women cannot do everything by themselves, that they need men to support them. Then that gender issues are not only women's issues, that men are engendered themselves, that change of gender roles is asking for men. Then comes the issue of gender budgeting, which is a new tool, a new invention, so to say, in the promotion of gender equality. And finally, women in security sector. So there is this whole movement which is really impressive, and this is happening in like 25 years. We're talking about Southeastern Europe and Eastern Europe. If we specify that to the series of movements, apropos this how to get involved with men, since I was an activist and I was a single mother, and then I was bringing my daughter to different women's groups and discussions, and we founded Women's Studies Center in Belgrade in 1992, and we started at university in 1992, Women's Studies, etc. And she would be coming to different protests with me, but also these women's groups. And she was little when she asked me, well, Mom, you women are talking only to yourselves, and men don't hear you. So this is always like, except for Thomas now, we don't have men. And this is really a huge issue. It's a huge issue. Men need to understand that they're gendered. They're gendered the same way women are gendered, but asymmetrically. That's all. So it has to become known. It has to be accepted as almost a kind of axiom in our societies. Now, this series of movements can be translated into the following: that we actually see the movement from women only to gender and to men. In the Balkans, for example, you have, for men, you have a now Balkan kind of project on men promoting non-traditional men's roles, and it's called Be a Man, Budi Mushka, which is ironic because Be a Man is, they actually reinterpreted something which should mean completely different to be a man in masculine terms. Now they say be a man, but be a man in a sense of not do violence against women, have a healthy lifestyle, etc. So be a man in a good sense. From women's NGOs to institutions, we have this movement because gender issues were only existing in women's groups and maybe some universities, but now they're becoming institutionalized. From random and scattered knowledge to more systematic research and gender statistics. Now we have gender statistics, worse or better in different countries, it depends, but there is a gender-sensitive statistics. From lack of regulation to legal provisions, from legal provisions to implementation, from violence to politics, and to economy. Economic issues stayed the last because they're the most difficult to deal with. Everything else is just blah, blah, blah. But when it comes to violence against women and women's employment, that's really the tough thing. From violence to politics to economy, from scattered interventions to more holistic approaches, from random projects to overarching national mainstreaming. So it's not only about how to mainstream one local office of, for education or something, but it is how to mainstream the whole educational system. From competition between women's NGOs and institutions, gender mechanisms, we actually can see the movement towards more collaborative approach. From activism to professionalism, I like to call it from mission to profession, which puts very different demands now on women's organizations, and many of them are not being able to accept this new challenge. From women's movements, genuine without donors, to donors-driven projects and interests. In Bosnia, like 20,000 people are being employed in civil society organizations. So of course, it's a huge area of employment. And of course, then there will be huge tensions between women's NGOs and institutions for gender equality. From lack of gender knowledge to biased transmission of knowledge from the core, especially US, much less from Europe, to the more creative approach to knowledge production with stronger regional and national ownership. From countries in the wars to regional cooperation, what we have now in the Balkans, gender mechanisms have very strongly pronounced regional cooperation. From chaotic situation on gender market to more developed division of labor between different gender stakeholders. In the beginning, one women's group would be doing everything against the violence, economic empowerment, everything. Now we have this specialization, which goes in line with professionalization. From vague criteria of donors, including SIDA, to RBM design. Do you know what is RBM? Results-based management of the project, which is a very technical way of dealing with the projects, but it enables some kind of control of inputs and results. So the projects have been technocratized, becoming more technical, which has pros and cons. Pros, that there is a better control of if you put money what you will get, but what is cons, that you are losing context and contextual approaches because you cannot apply the same type of scheme into different countries. So then we have a reaction to that. Because the problem is with impact. There is a difference between results and impact. I will give you the example, and I think it's important. You can have a kind of project related to raising awareness for gender-based violence. and then you can have a certain amount of money given for the public campaigns. And you can list TV shows where that was discussed, how many publications have been made, leaflets had been given to population, etc., etc. This does not mean that you have produced the impact. So many of the projects, women's projects, unfortunately, have swallowed lots of money without producing a profound effect since donors came. And very often I can see this paradoxical situation that sometimes women's groups without money actually make better impact than women's groups that have large amounts of money at their disposal. So we have to move to a different understanding of this field, and that means to holistic approach, and also to understand how something works or doesn't work. We need to understand the problem of saturation. For example, something might be talked about a lot, like violence against women. Public opinion, public discourse can be saturated with the talk about violence against women, while at the same time violence against women can stay on a high level or even become higher. So there is this thing which is called gender fatigue, and I was first years ago told about gender fatigue in United Nations agencies, which means that policymakers are giving up on making gender equality because they think it's such a difficult task, so they better give up. And now I hear that there is a gender fatigue in European institutions as well. And judging by how little has been done for women, and very little has been done in the last several decades, actually women are on the loser side of this neoliberal game, more than men. Men are also, but women are more. Judging by that, I mean, this gender fatigue is very serious disease. But gender fatigue is a result of the fact that we saturate discourses while in reality we do very little. And a lot of projects, especially in Southeastern Europe and in Eastern Europe, the money went exactly into this public campaign, awareness raising, etc. What was genuinely done in America by women's groups. You know, nobody was paying women's groups to get together and raise awareness. And the question is how much you can disconnect awareness from the real life. You know, I have been at one meeting of local NGOs in Serbia dealing with, working on SOS hotlines, etc. And one woman commented that sometimes it's even better if a woman is suffering from violence, that she accepts it as normal, because then she has chances to outlive her husband, because he's usually alcoholic, and she takes it as something outside of her own thing. And that she knows the cases of women who have been treated by women who have been actually clients of different women's NGOs, where they were told about how the violence their consciousness has raised, but they didn't have a place to go and they had to return home, and then they were experiencing huge conflict and they really suffered more than if their conscience has not been raised. It's a very ironic and very cynical situation, actually. But what I want to say is how much you can raise awareness if you cannot at the same time offer solution. How much you cannot disconnect awareness from reality. And things need to go together. Now, I will just say that this project success has to be contextualized policy intervention. And we have, if we have context on one hand and policy interventions on the other hand, policy intervention has its own logic, but it has to be connected with the logic of context. Now, success of the project is also related to the momentum. When you want to make a project that is policy related to gender equality, it makes a difference in what phase you implement the project. And there are three phases. There is a phase initial phase, when a new policy or new issue is being introduced into the context. And that is a moment when all donors are ready to invest into that new, whatever the new issue is. Sometimes it has been all kinds of issues, had a momentum when they were new issues, and because they were new issues, they were getting all the attention from the donors. And it's very well known in women's organizations that donors change fashions. So if something is new, it will get money, and if something is also highly exoticized or presented as an extreme, this is why women's organizations dealing with violence against women are prone, to give bigger, to present actually violence as more spread than it really is, which is a very tricky strategy because you lose credibility that way. But I remember the times when our famous groups, anti-violence groups, were saying that every third woman is raped, or I don't know what. And this is unsustainable. This should not be done. But there were times when donors were very sensitive to these extreme issues. And sometimes around one case, different organizations succeed to get a lot of money. Or that money is being used in a different way. Like women from Srebrenica, that's a very good case. And there is no one in Bosnia who would be telling you that money has not been used in vain from many organizations that were so-called working in favor of mothers and widows from Srebrenica. So this is a problem. But then there is a mature phase of intervention when a policy is getting a full momentum, and then methods can be repeated, because the first thing is related to some innovation. In this second phase, mature phase, you can take a method that has been applied by one or invented by one NGO and spread it. And in many ways we are in that phase. Now there is what they call best practices and sharing of, not best, but now it's called good practices. It's a very good way of disseminating knowledge. And this is very much done among women's groups, and donors insist on that. And I fully support that kind of approach, because I think we can really learn fast. We can learn much faster than we are used to, especially due to new technologies. But then there is a saturation phase. And saturation phase means that a topic might be exhausted and donors might become disinterested into the topic, although the problem is not resolved. And the typical case is with gender-based violence, where we still have huge problem of gender-based violence, but it is not so sexy topic anymore, because things move all the time and they move into new territories. While moving into new territories, what is happening is And this makes me quite allergic because I'm a sociologist and I was also a demographer, and I like to deal with numbers, figures. And it makes me quite nervous when I realize that because of this search of new territories, suddenly attention turns into some small groups, while big groups stay out of attention. And now, for example, in Bosnia, old women are not mentioned anywhere, and there are large numbers of old women. So we are not talking about some marginal little group. We're talking about large numbers. In donors' policies, in donors' orientation, very often big groups were simply irrelevant. This is interesting. Okay, so I will go to big case. How much time do I have left?
Well, I think do we have questions? I think we should have time for questions. So not too much, maybe 10 minutes.
Okay, then I will finish with the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, because it's an interesting case related to gender equality, and many things can be, I'm sure, can be transferred because of the similarities. Now, we're not talking here about the core country, but a country which is in many ways similar to the countries of the South Caucasus. First of all, it is important to mention that Bosnia and Herzegovina, the way it is, has been created by Dayton Agreement in 1995, which really helped the war to stop. But in many other ways, it created many other problems that are fully visible at the moment, which means, in short, dysfunctional state. So the state is so complex that it has state, Bosnia and Herzegovina, then it has two entities, Republic of Srpska and Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Then Republic of Srpska is kind of easy case because it's centralized republic with authoritarian government at the moment, but nevertheless the opposition has just united for the next elections, so we will see what will be the output. And then we have Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is federation of majority of Croats and Muslims or Bosnians, and it is designed of 10 cantons. So there are 4 levels of governance in Bosnia and Herzegovina state. For example, there are 13 ministries of education. There are 13 constitutions, etc. This makes things enormously complicated for everything, including for gender equality, because gender equality law of state had to be harmonized not only with these 2 entities, but had to be harmonized with all these other legal documents of all other governmental levels. What is really striking is that Bosnia and Herzegovina has been a receiver of